Malo elei, korege ufanga yang aifa takpatobe ufa faki. I'm recording this presentation from the land of the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people. And this land used to be named Nam, but it was renamed by the settlers as Melbourne after one of the prime ministers of England and one of the very close friends of Queen Victoria. So this presentation comes across from a land that continues to be occupied by the settlers and colonizers. I thank Professor Claessens and the planning team for the invitation to participate in this exciting event. And I'm sorry that I'm not there to meet you and to listen to the presentations in person and share in the discussions and conversations. And of course, to enjoy the wine and chocolate tasting, which would be just right at this time of the afternoon here. The title for my presentation has become less assertive and more humble, now with a question. Would Vishnu save the poor fishie and Slender plant? I quickly add two confessions. First, I confess that I'm not a scholar of Islamic or Hindu scriptures, and the readings that I propose are shaped by my native and Methodist upbringing. I will check later with my Muslim and Hindu advisors to see how disrespectful my readings are of their sacred texts, and I apologize in advance to Muslim and Hindu adherents and scholars in the room participating in this conference. I'm sorry that I have not finished my homework before this presentation. And second, I confess that I do not have a fully written academic paper, and I will present in our native Pacifica oral and oratory ways. I will present to a PowerPoint that I've prepared to keep me focused. I presented my version of transtextual reading in Illusions of Control that came out in 2003. There are several elements in transtextual reading, and I will explain and illustrate two in this presentation. In Illusions of Control, I use trans to convey two motions, crossing and transgressing. Crossing between texts, between subjects, between ideas, between authorities, between locations, etc. And transgressing of textual, methodological, and ideological positions. Crossing off limits and transgressing of ideologies and positionalities. The main controversies in my 2003 invitation were two. Well, there are more than two, but there are two that I want to bring to your attention in this presentation. One, in terms of crossing, I argued that unrelated texts that lie together under the same covers of the Bible may be read across from one text to and around the other text. That is, texts do not have to be related or relatable for one to read them transtextually. And with regard to transgressing, I argued that the meanings of biblical texts are outside the control of texts, outside the control of textuality, and outside of the control of readers. Thinking that meanings are contained within and by text, and thinking that one can control textual meanings are illusions with an I, illusions, because text and meanings are elusive with an E. Illusions of Control was a call for readers to own our illusions, and the limits of our reading practices. Put another way, readers should not be too anxious about needing to use the correct method to draw the correct textual relations or to find the correct meanings. My version of transtextual reading, remember that this was in the late 1990s, my version affirms that reading is a crossing and transgressive exercise. Transgressive upon the text, transgressive upon biblical traditions, transgressive upon the institutions of biblical criticism, etc., etc. I was influenced by my academic advisors and mentors, who in the late 1980s and early 1990s were encouraging literary, narrative, and intertextual reading. They were pushing back at and being transgressive upon formalist practices and mindsets. I found encouragement among readers who look like me and who continue to influence my reading even nowadays. These transgressive readers and their comrades encourage interdisciplinary and cross-cultural reading. And I draw special attention to Mosala, because in his 1989 work, he crossed the divide between biblical studies, theology, politics, economics, and more. He crossed divides that many in the Euro-American academic circles taught me to respect and enforce. In other words, Mosala and many others do what I call transtextual reading in their own beats and timings, according to their own labels. So this is not new. My version of transtextual reading is not new, but another version in addition to what other people were already doing. To illustrate the two drives in my version of transtextuality, the drives for crossing and transgressing, I offer a cross-scriptural reading in this presentation. Here I follow the lead of Archie Lee of Hong Kong and the simple fact that I live alongside Muslims and Hindus. I don't read Jonah in Palestine, Assyria, or Babylon, but in a world peopled by Muslims and Hindus with their customs, clothes, scents, foods, borders, etc. In the Quran, the slender plant shifts from providing relief to the angry Jonah looking over Nineveh to the beach to provide relief for a fishie traveler who needs care after being vomited onto shore. The Quran uproots the plant from after Jonah left Nineveh and plants it at the beach before Yunus goes into Nineveh. I imagine that Steed discussed the functions of the slender desert plant in the narrative and its afterlife. And I add to that the Quran's repositioning of the plant. The Quran transports the slender plant from the desert to the beach to become a slender beach plant. If you can see in this artwork, Yunus is naked, sitting under a slender beach plant with white eyes, with white leaves, opening flowers, hooking vines, and two big fruits. Yunus covers himself with the leaves and touches one of the big fruits. Touching the fruit suggests that he wants to eat it, which anyone who has been at sea would understand. But the work is queer, and I will leave the opening flowers and big fruits hanging for now. The Quran gives the slender beech tree a different function. I explained the wisdom of this shift in my Earth Bible commentary. Yunus would have been worn out from being mangled in the belly of the fish, and it makes good sense that there is a plant at the beach for him to rest under and recover before he goes into the city. Hence, the relocation of the slender plant to the beach invites readings that are caring for Yunus. If I was a die-hard historical and literary critic, which I'm not, I would problematize the Quran's version. But in a transtextual reading, the Quran shows that the Masoretic text does not control the narrative. This is an example of one scripture crossing and transgressing another scripture, and accordingly keeps the text open for readers with transgressive and querying eyes. My Earth Bible reading looked for healing on behalf of Jonah, and I foregrounded one of the Pacifica native insights that after the fish vomited, it would have died. I did not consider another option for the big fish until I was reminded of our daughter's concern for the poor fishie when we went on her first fishing trip. And her mother later told me that one of Vishnu's avatars was a fish. Hence the new twist in this presentation, beginning with our daughter's question, did the poor fishie have to die? Raising this question in the context of the Quran's repositioning of the slender plant invites a second question. Did the slender desert plant of the biblical version, did it have to die? Both questions transgress the control of the biblical and Quranic texts, and they bring me to the Hindu Vedas. When there are problems, the gods incarnate in some avatar to re-establish order. This theology is affirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, which consists of a conversation between Prince Arjuna and Krishna, his charioteer and guru. And this is in verse 7 in chapter 4. Whenever there is, quote, whenever there is a decline in righteousness and an increase in unrighteousness, O Arjun, this is Krishna saying, at that time I manifest myself on earth. When dharma is observed, there is righteousness. But when dharma is not observed, there is unrighteousness, and that is a state of adharma. To re-establish dharma, the God incarnates in an avatar and comes to re-establish order, to re-establish dharma. For this reason, Lord Vishnu has 10 avatars or incarnations. There are many traditions in the Hindu world, and avatars 8 and 9 differ from tradition to tradition and from place to place. But the other 8 remain the same. Briefly, the 10 avatars of Vishnu are Matsya, a big fish that came to save the creation from the great flood; Kurma, a giant tortoise that carried the mountain Madrachala; Varaha, a wild boar which came to bring the earth back when the demon Hiranyaksha pulled it down to the bottom of the sea. The fourth one is Narasimha, who was half man, half lion; Vamana, dwarf avatar; Parashurama, warrior avatar with an X; and then 7 is Rama, the prince, a popular prince who went to Lanka to rescue Sita. And number 8 is Krishna. Krishna in some places, Krishna is the hero in many legends, as in the Bhagavad Gita. And in some traditions, the avatar is Balarama. Balarama is the older brother of Krishna. And number 9, avatar number 9, in some traditions, it's Buddha. In others, it's Krishna or Vidova or Jagannath. So it's 8 and 9 different in different traditions. And the final one, avatar, is Kalki, that the avatar that comes on a white horse at the end when adharma prevails, and thus marks the beginning of another cycle of existence. So the first 3 avatars relate to the ocean. And for this presentation, I will explain how the first 2, which are water creatures, might help with the questions for the poor fishie and the slender plant. Matsya is a big fish that came to save the creation from the great flood. The legend starts with Manu, the progenitor of the human race, finding a little fish in his hands when he performed his water offering. The little fish asked Manu if he was wealthy enough to give it a home. Manu shows off his wealth by keeping the fish in his home, providing a home for the fish and feeding the fish. And the fish keeps growing and growing and growing and threatens to be larger than Manu's wealth. So Manu released the fish to the sea, and in the process learned that it was Vishnu. Vishnu then tells Manu that the world will be destroyed by fires and floods. And Vishnu instructs Manu to gather all the creatures of the world into a boat that has been built by the gods. So Noah was not the only mythological human that had access to a big boat. When the deluge came, Vishnu appears as a great fish with a horn, and that is Matsya. Manu ties the boat to Matsya, and he takes the boat and its cargo to safety. At one level, the story of Matsya is about a big fish providing rescue rather than destruction and death. And at this level, Matsya becomes a figure in my mind for Jonah's big fish. At another level, the story of Matsya is about a little fish tricking the first human person. At this transgressive level, I realized that I have been tricked by Jonah's fish. I expected it to die, but birth and death are not properties of legends, myths, and avatars. Avatars are not born, and they do not die. They manifest for a purpose, then they disappear. In that connection, the big fish that saved Jonah did not have to die. In the presence of Vishnu, the poor fishie did not have to die. Reincarnation is not about beginning or end, but about recovering dharma and transforming adharma. At this cross-scriptural juncture, I stand corrected. Kurma is a giant tortoise whose legend relates to the churning of the ocean to extract the nectar of immortality, Amrita. Vishnu instructed the divine beings, the devas and demigods, asuras, to churn the ocean in order to release Amrita, the nectar of immortal life. And this milk will give humans immortality. For a churning pole, the divine beings, the devas and asuras, used the mountain Madrachala, and they used the serpent Vasuki for their churning string or churning rope. To assist the churning process, Vishnu came as a giant tortoise to carry the mountain. And the devas and the asuras would pull the serpent like they were in a rope pulling game. When the Amrita was released, the devas and asuras fought over it, and the story turned bad. But my focus here is on Kurma, a giant turtle that lifted a mountain so that the devas and asuras could churn the ocean. Kurma's role was to facilitate the task of churning the sea. The Quranic Slender beach plant served a similar function, to facilitate Jonah's recovery by giving him shade and food so that he may rest, heal, and recover before he goes in to churn Nineveh up. The slender plant did not die in the Quran, but lives on with a critical question upon the biblical narrative. Did the poor, slender desert plant have to die? In the presence of Vishnu, the poor plant did not have to die. Herewith is a critique of the biblical narrative's inclination to deliver death and destruction, which are evidence of adharma and righteousness in the Vedas. In this cross-scriptural reading, the Quran provides transtextual space for reimagining the biblical narrative. And the Vedas, through two of Vishnu's avatars, the Vedas invites reimagining the biblical and Quranic narratives. In closing, I confess to the obvious. The cross-scriptural insights proposed in this presentation are products of reading. Readers like myself and others and like yourself, we do not control the text, but we can churn them. And Jonah is a great narrative for this kind of reading. Jonah is mythological and cynical, and I find healing in reading it accordingly. I confess my readings, my crossings, my transgressions, my illusions, and I celebrate that I do not control the text. Ending with the image of the Quran slender beach plant, that artwork. My transtextual reading sees the flowers' openings, and my reading touches the fruits of the text, but I leave them hanging for other readers to do what they like to do with such inviting flowers and big fruits. Thank you, and I look forward to our conversation and look forward to hearing your comments and questions.